Okay. Okay, welcome everybody to Utility Emergency Response Podcast. We're here with Joe Abrams from ACS. And we have another a great podcast for you. We're gonna talk about what he does for our industry. As you know, we're heavily involved with anything utility emergency response and anything related to that. Also, I'm heavily involved with the Security and Emergency Management Committee for the Cal Nevada section for AWWA. So, uh, Jim, do you want to go ahead and introduce our guest, and you can take it from here?
Sure. Hey, welcome, Joe. Good to have you on the podcast. You and I go back over a decade, and a lot of work that we did with Cal Warren and Cal Nevada section, actually for a brief period of time and a key period of time. You took over the new technology committee and really took that from a one, two, maybe three member committee to now one of them that rivals Isaac's Security and Emergency Management Committee. So you've always been an innovator, and that's one of the things that we want to talk about. We want to talk about that in the areas that you've been in, especially in Texas and in California, and your relationship with Cal Warren. But again, following what you've been doing, I think there's some very interesting aspects that our listeners and viewers would want to get information on. But also, we just finished a podcast on fire mitigation with Komodo and some of the areas that they're moving into with rapid deployment of teams and so forth. I immediately thought of ACS and said, wow, that could be a tool that they could use to communicate and move resources where they need to throughout the state. So we will end up talking about that later on after the podcast. But why don't you start off by giving us a brief history of ACS, how it started, and now, the moving into the Cal Warren and water sector.
Okay, thank you for having me here today. I'm looking forward to this. It's as you know, Jim and Isaac, there's a lot about a 20-year history of ACS, and so there's a lot to cover. We've done a lot of different exciting projects, but kind of from how we started was that the thing that kind of makes us unique or different is that in 2005, 2006 timeframe, we were started conversations and ended up with an agreement with a group of counties in the San Antonio area of Texas. And at that time, it was part of an agreement that's called an interlocal agreement in Texas. There's about probably half the states that call it that. And what an interlocal agreement is when two or more jurisdictions decide they want to share the cost, the capital assets, or in-kind participation to achieve a goal that's good for the community, that's good for all three of those partners, or three or four or five or whoever they are. And so there was 12 counties involved in that. And I probably should go ahead and mention also that when it gets big enough or whatever the reason, those jurisdictions decide that I don't want to try and manage this anymore, then by state law, they can form a nonprofit organization to manage the interlocal relationships and facilitate what those jurisdictions or members are wanting to achieve. That's what ACS corporate is that we were formed, we're a nonprofit, actually a 501c3, classified as a charitable nonprofit. And our goal is to manage or facilitate the actions of what started off with 12 counties and is now over 900 jurisdictions that participate in our program.
And you're heavy in technology. I mean, is it safe to say you're somewhat of a technology nonprofit centered on emergency management?
Yeah, that's kind of what makes us very unique. There are a number of interlocal cooperative organizations, which is what we're called in Texas vernacular. and or an ICO. And many of them, most of them probably are like buying groups that they do cooperative purchasing or volume buying for the groups. We do that, but we also do, because we're focused on technology, when we're listening to the members, our focus is rural communities. And so therefore what they're doing is in many of those cases, they have kind of limited resources, especially technical resources. So what they're looking for is they don't have the ability of even many of them having an IT staff. And so we focus a lot on originally cloud-based technologies and other technologies that we can support from a distance and monitor to keep it operational. So we end up being very high tech in the assessment, design, planning, procurement of both equipment and services, installation, coordination, and then monitoring and hosting of it afterwards. So from cradle to grave, we're there. So when we work with our members, we are responsible for every asset we install at those members through the life, as long as they stay a member, and as long as that product is operating and they want it to stay operating, we help them do it. And so it becomes very, very technical, very, very involved, but it makes it to where a community of 500 people or less, and some of our communities have 500,000, but many of them are less than 1,000 people, and the system stays up, and we have 99+% uptime on our equipment that's even running in those remote locations.
Can you give a little background on what were some of I mean, you're in a lot of different technology now, but what was the kind of the genesis technology?
Well, probably certainly the foundation that we found working with communities, and it really applies to all communities, but especially challenging in rural communities, and that is communications. If you look at any of the after action reports that came out after 9/11, when we got involved with it, literally up until 5 years ago, I think 4 or 5 years ago is the first time I saw an after action report that the number one item that says, hey, this could be better is communications. It's still like number 2 or 3 in most of them, but but communications was the foundation. If you cannot communicate quickly, accurately in a trusted environment and get it to the right people in the right place, then you're not doing as good as you can be. And so our focus from the very beginning was, how do we come up with a reliable system, first of all, for doing communications? And we can send communications in many, many formats simultaneously. And then the other aspect of that is, how can you do it as fast as possible? How can you send out a communication that can happen with less than 1 second delay and get it to the right people in the right circumstances so that they can react?
For our listeners and viewers to get an idea, give us just a little bit of your background, because again, if you got this technology nonprofit that started, how did you lead into it?
Okay, that's yeah. So first of all, I am not a first responder. Uh, I I've thought about this quite a bit, and the history. If you go back we'll just say decades. I'll keep it at that, and you can decide how many decades that is. But I've been around a long time, and when I started working, I actually started work in aerospace, and so I came out of engineering school and went to work for an aerospace company. And my first assignment was what's called a liaison engineer. And a liaison engineer their goal is they understand engineering, but they also understand the shop environment. And I think that's why I was picked, because I'd grown up with my father, who had a shop, and he knew I'd worked with machine operators, I'd worked with tool and die people. I understood their world, but I'd gone to engineering school and understood theirs. And I was a good listener, and I was able to listen to what they were saying and trying to be the interpreter to say, okay, here's what the engineers are talking about in your vernacular. And if the problem is from the shop, tell the engineers, okay, I'm going to change the language to engineering speak so that you understand what it is they're saying is not working. And so I really started doing that, and for about the first 5 years, and then I successful enough, I guess I was transitioned over to a technology department and put on a technology task force to re-engineer the entire company's technology. And I got exposed to, and I just fell in love with technology and kind of had the understanding of listening to people. And so I'd done all of that work. After 20 years in aerospace, I kind of moved from that and started my own consulting firm and started doing that same thing, being the interpreter between the people in the operations group on the shop floors and the executives to help them understand why they're not talking to each other, why they're not understanding what each is saying. And about 3 years into that or four, I got an opportunity to work for governments, and I realized how bad that was in government, that the two don't talk to each other and they don't listen to each other. And so we started doing that work. I developed a technology that it actually does and patented it, and that allows for seamless sharing even between jurisdictions in a cloud-based environment. And that was the technology that got picked up by the folks in San Antonio. I'd won an award right after 9/11 about this innovative technology that was going to change the world. And they happened to be at that meeting up in Chicago, where I got the award. And they came afterwards and said, "Can you come down to San Antonio and meet with about 20 of our people?" And I did. And that was 2005. And that's how I got there. So,
So it's safe to say you're a rocket scientist that has figured out how to help government communicate better.
I suppose, yeah, I've had that analogy
We
made
hope.
times. So,
Um, can you give me some examples of some of the ACS successes, and some of those will be in, I think, in kind of the Texas area, but we'll also talk about some of those successes that you've had with, Cal Warren and in the water sector.
sure, sure. Um, well, probably just in sequence, kind of going through that, and that's how I think in my mind. I'm an engineer. I think I mentioned that part. And so, as I said, the foundation was really rapid notification and how to get the information out. That project was funded. That was one of the first projects funded by Texas, and both the and so as a part of that, soon afterwards, we started realizing, like I said earlier, about how do you get it out faster, and we realized that especially in rural communities, but even most communities, when the stuff hits the fan, then everybody's busy and they think they're going to have time to send out a message or pull up a mobile app and send out that message. And then pretty soon they're going, did somebody evacuate all the people down by the river? And they're going, oh man, I meant to do that. It's in my protocol. I forgot to send it. And you're going, great. Well, now how many people are in danger because of that? And so we started looking at how do we get things system wise to automatically trigger those messages. So one of the first projects we took on was automating the messages by tying it into local flood gauges, so that when the water hits a certain level and says you might have to evacuate or need to plan for it, pack your bag and get ready to maybe evacuate, the messages go out, and the emergency manager, who's really a services person, who would be normally sending it out, they're busy. They may be up to their knees already in water, creating or responding to a disaster. They'll look at their text and they go, good, that message went out. And they don't have to take the time. They don't have to find a computer, pull it up on their phone. It just happens as it's supposed to. And so when the rural evacuation order comes out, the right messages are done. And so it's really taking that emergency response plan and putting in those rules into a set of software that says, at this point, when this thing happens, this is the decision we've already made. So this is the message that needs to go out. And we've done that there's probably 100 different ways and devices right now that we can trigger automated messages going out. And so that was also done in Texas. We started a project called Responder Credentialing, which was supporting a FEMA project at the time that they needed in order to have verified responder credentials. And so we started that project, and that's worth mentioning. It was used for just mutual aid between fire departments, multiples responding to a fire area. If you got 20 different agencies showing up, how did the people who may have never seen this fire group crew show up before know that they're qualified and verified that they're, not going to be putting themselves or others in harm's way? And so we employed that, and then that turned into people ask us and said, "Can you make that responder ID card open an actual door?" And that was a group of hospitals along the Texas coast who wanted doctors and others, law enforcement at certain times, to be able to get access into their buildings and emergencies. So so we called that program called Situation-Based Responder Entry System. And so we built that, and then that was picked up by cities and counties and others. It says that's available, that's useful for municipal courts. It's certainly usable for schools. There's just a lot of reasons why you would want certain response groups to be able to get through locked doors or into secured areas during a particular type of event that's happening. We developed then a panic and monitoring system, so that you, again, for triggering the messages and being able to declare lockdown. It's been used a lot for like the active shooter scenarios. And we've done several of those projects, a lot of them actually. That's probably one of our biggest selling projects right now. They're attracting members to come on board. One that has been used in California. It was developed in Texas, but used in California was the disaster entry re-entry, which allows for responders or just staff workers to be able to have a paper certificate, basically, they carry or on their phone, as well as something for their vehicle that allows, if it's during a lockdown or during some sort of if you're doing a reentry to a disaster area, or entry if you don't normally work there or weren't evacuated, or what was used in California, we used that for when they set up curfews in certain areas during years of COVID. They'd set up curfews, and if a person's called out as a water service worker to work on a water leak, he's driving his personal car to the office. Law enforcement pulls them over and says, "What are you doing out here? It's 2 a.m. You're past curfew." He has a certificate he can pull up. They can scan it on their phone and verify that, "Oh, okay, I see you're a water service worker. So yeah, you're being deployed." So
Yeah,
it makes that
that was very valuable during my tenure at the utility I worked. When that happened, there were two components of ACS that I think worked very well. Well, three. First, the mass communication, because that's the kind of the hub of what you do. And we'll talk just a little bit more about that in a minute. But being able to tie these other programs into the mass communication, like the entry re-entry, we used that because our operators come in at various times of the day and night. So during the day wasn't a problem, but you have the grave shift operator that's coming in at 11 o'clock when a curfew has been issued, and being able to let local PD, the sheriff's office, know that this is happening, and you can just use your phone to scan the QR code, and you'll know that this person is legitimate to enter this area because they don't have a marked vehicle. It doesn't say, the water company name or the power company name on the side. They're taking their personal vehicle to that location. And that was very valuable. And then the commodities pod application, where we distributed all of the masks and the face coverings, that was extremely valuable because that allowed us to put people receiving those commodities into a time frame so that we didn't have this huge surge. We were able to load level and really level out the ability for the CPOD, commodities pod, to be able to distribute appropriately. Since the since the mass communication is a kind of key component, what are the similar? I mean, there's a lot that people can look at. There's all kinds of mass communication, but what makes yours similar to those, but also what differentiates you from some of the other mass communication type applications out there?
It seems like that there seems to be a trend we've noticed in a number of especially in recent years, and I understand that from there's a lot of applications come out and says, well, this is really, really simple to use. It's available on a mobile app, and people sign up for it, and it's all in the cloud, and that's all fine, except for the fact that and it is, if you're looking for something that's very simple, very cost effective, that's what you want to do, that's great. But it is not designed to be an integrated, interconnected piece of a larger picture. And that's what ACS focuses on. And we'll even tell some of our members, and they'll say, well, we're looking for a particular type of technology. How do you want it to work? And if they come back and say, oh, we're just looking for something simple, we don't care if it interconnects, we just want to be able to use it out here to do this one thing, we'll literally point them in a different direction and say, here's, we're a nonprofit. We don't make any more money or less money whether or not you decide to do it or not. What we're trying to do is tell them and help them, those members, get what they're looking for. And so I don't want them to spend the money if they're not going to get the value from that. So we kind of take that approach. And then from the technology side, our focus is how do we help those people who are really trying to figure out how we're going to solve that problem? For example, like mass distribution we talked about for the CPODs. That's integrated in with our directories, with our registries. So anybody registering to get information about picking that up, they can also oftentimes they'll have an option that says, would you like to check a box and get other notices like automated weather notices, or would you like to check this box? And again, that's all configurable how you want to use it. But when residents or people or staff members sign up to do things, you can kill 2 or 3 birds with one stone. In that one step, they can actually sign up and say, okay, I want to get these, I want to get this also. And so that's been very useful for things like that. As you know, the auto directories, that was actually a California project that you worked on with us to get the auto directories. Now that's being used by across the country by different groups, thinking that's one of the greatest inventions since sliced bread. And then a
Explain
project.
the auto directories a little bit more in detail. What is that?
So the auto directories are when, say, you have when you go into a community and you're saying, I want to register different organizations. This applies to Cal Warren, for example. They have organizations that join the program and say, okay, I'm going to register, and here's my organization. And they register and say, I'm a part of Region 1 or Region 3 or 6 or whatever, we're in California. And it goes into a database. Well, in that database, then they also have key contacts, who's primary, alternate, emergency manager, who are the contacts there that you have. So it puts those people contacts in there as well. But from the perspective of, if you go to most Warren websites throughout the United States, none of them are as big as Cal Warren. Most of them have anywhere from 20 to 50 members across the entire state because they just don't have the diversity and the volume that California has. And so California has 8,000 plus potential water agencies. 400 or 500 of them, probably more than 5, between 500 and 600 of them are now Cal Warren members, they're the largest ones. So it's a very large system, and literally every week or two, there's 1 or 2 members joining. So it's very dynamic of who's joining the program. And you try and maintain that on a traditional website, and somebody has to go in and every month or whatever and add 1 or 2 or 3 more agencies and says, here's what's added. And so it just becomes burdensome to do that. What the auto directories does is allows us to link from the content page on the website to, when you click on it, say, I want to see who's in Region 1, who are all the Region 1 members. When you click on the page, it has a little line come across and it says generating list. And it goes to the database and it generates the list of the 127 members that are currently, as of the database, in there. Also, if somebody like one particular organization in Riverside, California, decided that they've updated their new emergency manager, or they have a new primary point of contact for Cal Warren, and they updated it 10 minutes before and updated it in the system, that name, when you click on that organization, it will give you the latest name that was just improved, or the latest cell phone number of who that was. So it makes it almost instantaneously dynamic to the information that's in the database, and it's the same database that's used for mass communication. So it's serving, that database serves the purpose, and as you know, that database is actually used by probably 4 or 5 different applications, all off of the same information that's integrated back to that communications database.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that has been a game changer, because now maintenance of a database becomes, or the lists become so much easier. You don't have to go in, manually find where that utility needs to be in alphabetical order, and the ability to sort by county, by city, by utility name, all, very valuable tools, and have been just fantastic. Some of the areas that have been really concerned for me, and I think a direction that we want to go in the water industry, is the kind of resource typing, and a resource similar or like what Isaac has, that lay flat hose, is so valuable after an earthquake. Being able to resource type that and have that available to that large membership list. One of the things you said, yeah, we're approaching 600. Actually, I think we're now approaching 700 in the database. Just in this last week, we've had probably 6 or 7 utilities join, which is fantastic. What is part of the system that maybe you can describe briefly about resource typing, and how that can play a role in tying in with the mass communication?
Sure. So resource typing is at its foundation. Again, it uses a database, but at its foundation, it uses the function that's referred to as the registry. I referred to that earlier. In a registry, you can decide, that is the user interface, if you will, the simplified user interface for entering and updating information. And that may be registering your organization and who are 2 or 3 your key contacts. The system then auto notifies, puts it in the database, auto notifies the people and potentially others in an organization to approve that member being a member. And as it also sends out notices to each of those people to individually register their own profile and say, here's my picture, here's my information, here's a little bit more about than just a basic, email and text message for me. It can geolocate where people are, both where they work as where they live. Again, all this is configurable. And then one of those people may be an asset manager. That asset manager, once he's registered or she's registered in the system, then it might send them a link and again, all this is automated or can be automated, or it sends them a link that says, oh, could you register your resources? And when they register the resources, they say, well, I have so much flat hose, I have so much of this, whatever it is, equipment, supplies, things like that are available for mutual assistance. And some jurisdictions we work with, they want to maintain all of their assets in there, and they'll just check a box to the right that says this is available for mutual aid and mutual assistance, and some things are not. So in that database, it keeps track of all their assets, of which anybody looking for that asset later on would only see the things that they say they're willing to share. And that, under like any mutual assistance, they're not committed, they have to share it. It's assuming it's available, and I and in a situation I feel I can give it out to you and I'm not threatened at the same time and needing those resources myself, then yes, I'm willing to help other people. And that's kind of how mutual aid or mutual assistance works. So yeah, it's a way to do that, organize the information, and then how you track or do the resource typing. There's several standards out there on how to do that. There's a federal standard that never was completely fleshed out. And I know that AWWA is working on and has in the past, they kind of have standardized some of the key resources they're interested in. Another one's a little looking, I guess, in the future, and I think you and I have talked about this, was is there's been some sort of a discussion and interest from some of the members about sort of in resource typing, having a I have capability. So it's kind of a marriage between that says if somebody's having a disaster, that I can send out and say that you've got 700 members and I'm in this area and it knows where I'm at. And I'm saying that I need this particular thing. And it could be, we've, as you know, in Cal Warren, we've seen things where somebody says, I'm looking for literally as something as a 16 or 24-inch gate valve. And which is not, I just happen to be out of them. I have to have them or, whatever, but I need one. And so, and when they do that, and I'm willing to look within 100 miles of here and I'll drive to pick it up or we can meet them halfway. And it goes out to every single member within that 100-mile radius in a text message with a link on it that they can click on it and they say, 3 people came back and said, yes, I have that and I can absolutely let you have that. And so immediately they get a response that says it's more than just looking up in a resource database, because I may not have put it in to share that item, but who it is and what they're asking for, and I happen to have 5 of them on the shelf, giving them one is really not that big of an issue. I wouldn't have thought to make it as a resource item, but if it helps these people out and restores water service to their area, then it's certainly an emergency for the people who aren't getting water. And so it makes it a little bit more dynamic and much more functional in a real-time status than that. And it's not available, but we're very interested in working with any of our members in order to figure out how to get that funded or co-funded to make that happen.
And Isaac, that, start looking at all of the various aspects of, our network that we're really showcasing and bringing through the podcast. The lay flat hose after an earthquake is a critical resource. Well, being able to tie that in not only to find who has that resource, but then using the entry re-entry to be able to move that resource to the affected area just seems to be in a way a no-brainer. And with the last podcast, having this fire mitigation where the able to spray the fire retardant on a particular facility. As of last night, they had 10 to 20 trucks that they could move to the affected area for the Palisades fire and the Pasadena. But how do you communicate? How do you tell them where to go? How do you give them access to those areas? I've got the vision and I can see how that can happen. And I know Joe, kind of shares that, and you too, but it's how do you put that all into action? And I think that's kind of over the course of the next few years, that's some of the things that we'll be taking a look at.
And Joe, quick question for you. Does it take a while for people to get used to these systems? Is it something that they're familiar with? It sounds like it's a completely different system than they would normally, right? Because right now we don't do resource typing, right, Jim? We're in the kind of like in the infancy of it. So
Yeah.
what how does that look for for the guy who's trying to get the generators, who's trying to get the lay flat hose for an emergency?
Yeah, towards your point, back when resource typing, that was one of the projects actually I was working on a subcommittee in Washington, D.C., not long after 9/11, a few years after. We were working on, because of my technology background, I was assigned and asked if I'd participate in this program for developing protocols and standards for, first of all, just communication standards, how to interconnect systems in the background to get communications. And one of those items in there was resource typing. How do we standardize asset configurations and asset terminology? And it was a very challenging project, even at the federal level, to get everybody to agree and understand what it was. And it was being forced by Homeland Security and FEMA at the time. And so a lot of our members, local jurisdictions, were working really hard to try and do that. And we rolled that out. And I'll be honest, kind of like in California, the reason we start talking about the I want, I have sort of thing, which is really more like a donation site, but its applicability is the same, very similarly. And it became kind of in people's mind because those that deployed the resource systems found it very difficult to go back and change when the standards changed, or to go just update it when they added new assets or got rid of old assets. I see you have one of these. Yeah, no, I sold that actually 6 years ago. I just didn't update the database. And so yeah, it is a challenge to that. It's as far as the rest of, that's why we created the registries. There isn't anybody who doesn't go out on the web on a regular basis. If you're on websites and says, "Oh, I'd like to sign up to get this thing," that they don't click on, they get up a little form that says, "What's my first and last name? What's my phone? What's this?" It's sometimes you can, like I said, they can be that simple, or it can also be more complicated and say more questions depending on how complicated the group is. So it doesn't really take long, I think, for members to understand the registries and the update registries,
Okay.
and the number of people who actually have to manage the database and understand that part of it are it's a fewer number of people. It's one or two, three people. And again, we've done what we can to simplify that and make it easier to manage. But at the same time, it is more than what, dealing with a lot of rural communities, especially, they're just not used to the level of technology that it takes to run the system on the background.
I see.
So,
And Isaac, that's one of the areas we all need to work. There is a significant change in the water industry with call it the gray wave. A lot of people like myself retiring from various water agencies and so forth, or moving departments within an agency. And so keeping the contact information up has always been a challenge. There are tools, and I think most of the communication softwares that are out there have them. What we've been using for the Cal Warren website, you can just click a few buttons and send out to the entire group saying, "Hey, we need you to update your information." There's the pluses to that is you could send that out on a weekly basis if you wanted. Then you've got your membership complaining that, "Why are you sending me all these notifications?" So there's the balance between what's the time frame to send that request out, that yes, it may be a nuisance to the water utility, but they are getting it and going, "Oh yeah, Jim Wollbrinck is not there anymore," or "Isaac has moved to this department. I need to update my information so that it is accurate." I do know that with a lot of the communications sent out, you get a certain number of kickbacks that it's not deliverable to that person anymore because they're gone. And so that is the challenge. And that same challenge is with the resource typing, that how do you make sure that that's updated? So and resource typing are certain resources are FEMA resources, that a backhoe, there's a lot of work that's been done on the water industry to make sure that the resource for a backhoe in FEMA is the same as it is in the water sector. And that's easy to do. But what do you do about lay flat hose when only the water sector is using that lay flat hose?
Right.
And that's not in the resource typing directory. The fire suppression and the fire retardant, like the Komodo that we talked to previously, that's a great resource that's out there. And there is a tool now potentially to do the mass communication to activate that resource. But how does the membership know about that resource and where it is and what it's capable of? What we're doing here, I think, lends to that, but there's some work to do to make sure that we can integrate that resource into a response, because it's not part of FEMA's and it's not part of the water sector right now. So how do we bring that in and then be able to notify and activate that network in a disaster?
There's
Yeah.
another key thing, Jim, that and Isaac, that I think is it's not absolutely required, but I think it significantly augments the ability of a resource network. And that is, it's something similar, Jim. I'll use the analogy of your fuel supply. And we've talked about how to, because one of the key elements of water is that whether it's a fire or earthquake or whatever that's affecting those individual agencies, one of the key resources is power. How do you get fuel into those places that, okay, the bridges are out? How do you get fuel there? Because you have generators and other stuff that has to keep operating and fleets of equipment. And so Jim had suggested for some time, has talked about this, and we've met with members of a similar type of group that represents all the fuel distributors in California on how they would form a network that could, in a database, make it to where if I'm looking for certain resources that involve fuel suppliers, it reaches across that database to be able to pull that in as well and say it may not be with other agencies. There may be a distributor that happens to have fuel trucks sitting 2 miles away. I just don't know they're there, and they don't know I have the need. And so I think the same thing, we started right after 9/11 working several projects that most of them failed across the United States. And it was creating business networks that were, and there's one operating, I think, still in California. We've met with them. How do you get what we would call affiliate members, so that where are the warehouses and distributors and manufacturers of flat hose? What do they have? So if somebody puts out a search and says, I'm looking for this, for how I can get flat hose within 100 miles, even if it's a little further than 100 miles, if it's in the rules or whatever the logic is you're looking for, if one of those is a manufacturer, they get notified also. And they could be looking and say, well, nobody really here has it or has it available. But by the way, I know there's a warehouse that's 200 miles away and we'll get it shipped overnight to you. And so you have it as fast as you can, or maybe in the same day. So that how do you tie in the business communities and these other key resources into that resource network? So when somebody asks for something, it's casting a much larger net than just going to other water agencies. So
Interesting.
Yeah. Isaac, any questions that you have for Joe?
I guess the biggest question I have is, what is it going to take for utilities to get on board with this? It just seems like it's a benefit, not only just to the utilities, but the community in general. Like, what's it going to take for them to understand and really get on board? Is it because I know the way water utilities are. I mean, I work with them all day. It's hard to adapt something new for them sometimes. Some utilities are better than others, but what's your guys' approach to getting this out there, trying to get people to see, hey, look at it, these are the benefits. What's your strategy for that?
Well, to be honest, we're since we are a nonprofit and we are limited on the amount of margin we can even make by our bylaws. For example, on projects we do, if we end up only spending at the end of the project, say it was going to be a $100,000 project on adding some sort of security or camera system or something in for them, and we only ended up spending, $70,000, we actually have to give the money back. So, that's another thing that makes us different from a vendor, is that we work with them day by day what the decisions are, and if we end up spending significantly less, we're allowed to make a little bit of margin, and all the margin we get actually has to go to nonprofit philanthropy work within the communities we serve. So it's a different kind of model. But because of that, just from word of mouth and things that we've done so far, we are growing rather rapidly. There's just a lot of members that are out there. It's easy to join. It doesn't cost anything. It's if you want to join the Cal Warren program, which uses some of our technology, that's relatively easy. Again, doesn't cost anything to join. And it gets you access to the benefits of it. It doesn't give you direct access to send messages or to use the technology, but you do as a part of the member, you can use the registries in the database, and you get notifications from Cal Warren that says, "Oh, we're looking for resources," or you can make a call that says, "Hey, I'd like to get resources." You can do that. If you really want to participate in the full, that's probably 10% of the technology we provide. And if you want to participate in a full member, there's what's called an interlocal agreement. There's one for California that says that you can sign up. It is and they you have to, like Cal Warren, you have to take it to whoever your governing body is and have them approve and say, yes, you're going to do this. And they sign off on it, send it in. I co-sign it, send it back, and now they're a member. And then we start with, a little bit more of an indoctrination and understanding. And of course, that can be ahead of time too, but understanding what they might want to use of it. And then from that, again, what they spend, how they want to do it, at what rate they want to do is entirely up to each member. Everybody's unique. Everybody's different. Some people just take baby steps. Some people want to leap forward and swallow the whole enchilada, I guess. So that's like I said, it varies by what it is and how they want to do, but it's easy to join. Just have to contact us and say, I'd like to explore a little bit more about what that would involve or what benefits that has for us. And
Yeah.
essentially from our mission, anything that has to do with safety, security, or general resiliency of a community, that's our mission. We're bound by that, but that's a very broad definition of that obviously involves a lot of stuff. So
Yeah, Isaac, I think a good example of that is how ACS got started in California with water, which was just a meeting. I believe it was in Tennessee, Joe,
yes.
and met one of our Cal Warren chairs. And that started the discussion on, wow, okay, we could use this for mass communication and for leak notification if we got to do a shutdown. That then led to one of the major utilities in California using the application for leak notification for residents. And Joe, I'll let you kind of talk about that, but they're monitoring through the newer technology, the AMI, the automated meter reading, and they're looking at what kind of usage could a customer have between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. when normally they wouldn't be using any water. And all of a sudden they see through the system that water is being used. Well, and that's where Joe comes in. So Joe, I'll let you kind of talk about that because I found that to be one of the very innovative approaches to using and how you're able to pivot and help a utility when they need it for a different solution that wasn't even in the quiver that you have.
Right. Right. No, that was a very exciting project. It still is. I really love working with them. We started, as you said, after the visit in Nashville, the presentation we made, and got introduced to the water industry. Well, actually, a gentleman came up and introduced himself and said, "I'm very interested in your program, how it's different." And that was, as you know, that was Steve Dennis, and from Alameda County Water District. He said, well, don't make a special trip next time you're out there in the Bay Area, which I didn't come out that often. So about over a year later, I called him up and said, hey, I'm going to be swinging by. Do you want to try and have a meeting? Absolutely. Timing is perfect. And I came to that meeting, and actually that's where I met you. And Steve had asked you to come in and meet at the same time. And we Alameda County became a member. There were several others in the Bay Area that joined, and one of those was San Francisco Public Utility Commission, SFPUC. And again, they joined from the emergency management side to send out notices to other districts, as well as they use it for dispatch. So almost all of their teams, they're dispatching out to solve water issues and things like that. They use our system for managing the dispatch side of that. And so I think they used to be like number one, but I think they're like number 3 or 4 now in the number of messages sent out because they literally dispatch hundreds of dispatches a day. And the however, as a part of that, we did a little educational session, and the people in the customer service group were having a project called leak alerts, and they were trying to figure out how to solve this problem. And the folks in the emergency management group said, you need to talk to ACS. It's their specialty of integration is exactly, I think, what you're looking for. And we started with that. As you said, they monitor it through their AMI system, and we work with them in order to create a rules engine that they controlled different aspects of it, like here's all the leak stats coming in. Here's how much this water, this household is using. For some reason, 24 hours a day, it's using, 6 gallons an hour, which is a little bit high for about 2 o'clock in the morning. So it would say flag this and say that's not usual. All of a sudden that started. They probably have a leaky toilet or maybe have an underground leak somewhere. And but it flags it on there. It says, here's the rules and here's the priority. Then they decide, okay, well, how many messages do I want to send a day? Because I don't want to overwhelm, not the system, that doesn't overwhelm us, but they don't want to overwhelm the residents. And they said, so we started off at like 100 residents a day, the worst 100. And then they have things in there that says, well, I don't want to call them on Monday or notify them on Monday and then Tuesday and then Wednesday. I mean, you got to give them a little bit of time to fix it. So not beat them up about it or you're going to make your residents unhappy. So it's controllable as well. How long do I wait before I send the next notice if it still hasn't been fixed? And then and then what's the sequencing? Do I want to text them first? Do I want to email them first? Do I want to call them first? And that may vary based on their profile as to what they have and how we notify those. And it even can end up in the result of, at the end, it says if you text and there's no response, and then an email, no response, and then there is a phone call and they don't answer, then literally it prints it out and goes over to a different service to where they print out and send them via snail mail an actual notice in the mail, USPS, to say you have a water leak, we think. And so it all the way through the process to the least technology to get them that message out. And there's a big concern when they started about, well, are residents going to be upset about this because seems pretty invasive, to some extent. However, they've reported back. I've done some presentations and seen some work with what they talk about at the presentations, talking about their program. They consider it one of the most highly successful programs that they've had at SFPUC. The residents absolutely love it. Their water consumption has had a dramatic decrease in the amount of leaks that they have, the amount of unused water or inappropriately used water, I guess. So anyway, they love the program. They've added it now from residents to multifamily dwellings to now businesses. And each one we enhance the system to handle it a little bit differently, different set of rules. And it's a great program. It's tremendous. And we think, like I said, it's a very exciting program. I'm glad to be a part of that. That's very exciting. So
yeah, and my 30 years in water, that's the first that I've seen of something like this. And from a customer service perspective, that ability to notify the customer in advance, where they may look at it as a little bit invasive. Hey, I'm using water when and which days and which time of day, but you don't get that call after the billing cycle that somebody's bill went from a normal $50 bill to a $300 bill, and they're upset, and it just, situations like that you want to avoid.
yeah, before the bill comes out, they get a notification that says, we think you have a leak in the first 2 days. So they're going, oh, okay. So that when they get the high bill, they know they've already rectified that situation. It's not 300, it's maybe 100, but next month it's going to be back to 50 again. So it solved that problem. And I should close the loop here. It's kind of come full circle. The latest project we did was a request from the emergency management group of SFPUC that says they realized that the billing department of SFPUC, which covers the entire city county of San Francisco, has probably the most accurate, up-to-date mobile and email system database, even more than the city does. I mean, as far as having accurate information out there. And so they had us change their program so that the emergency management, when they send out messages to residents, they're actually using every night, it updates all of the adds, changes, and deletes from the customer billing database over. So emergency management has the latest up-to-date contact information, so that their estimate, last I saw was they were estimating something like 98 or 99% connectivity rate to which is almost unheard of in any emergency management system out there. By connecting and interconnecting emergency management to customer service to that, and something that a residents see of value and want to keep it updated, you've solved a multitude of problems, including the ability to rapidly respond to 98% of the households instantly. And get it to the right people. That's phenomenal. And so, like I said, anything that's saving lives is important to me. So it's a very, very great success, and I really appreciate the partnership with SFPUC and what we've done.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, I know we're running up against the clock here. One of the areas that we didn't get to touch on that maybe we can at some future date is really the area that's just in its infancy. I experienced it in the beginning of December with the earthquake early warning. And I was up in Chico when the Ferndale earthquake happened, 7.0 off the coast in Chico, which is probably a good 150 miles away, plus or minus. I was walking down the stairs of my daughter's house, and all of a sudden the phone lit up. And by the time I got downstairs, my wife's phone was going off. We were standing in the kitchen there, and all right, where I got this earthquake early warning, but where is it? And is it a big one far away, or is it a small one that's fairly close? And then my granddaughter says, I think we're having an earthquake. And sure enough, the light fixture above the table was swinging, the stockings were swinging on the hearth, and it was a good probably 10-second warning. And I think some of the technology that ACS has to be able to notify crews that are up on a scaffold, or going through the radio system or the SCADA system, or various aspects of running our utilities as safe as possible, letting our people work as safe as possible. If I've got somebody in a hole working on a leak, I want to get them out of there and give them early warning. Yeah, the phone might work, but being able to blast something over the radio system or something of that nature could be huge. So, sometime down the road, maybe we'll be able to spend a little bit more time on that as it develops. Isaac, any last thoughts? Anything to close thing out between you and Joe? What do you think?
No, I just want to thank him for coming, and I do have more questions, but we're running out of time. And I think your technology can help communities. I think it's great. It sounds wonderful. It's just getting everybody on board, like you say, and the situation they have in San Francisco, that would be ideal for everybody, I think. I mean, that sounds really good. So just want to thank you for coming on, and maybe we can talk more about you getting more involved with our committee, with my committee, and speaking at our events, and if we can go down that road. So just wanted to appreciate your time.
Sure. And I thank you both for having the opportunity to talk a little bit about our organization, what it does, and at one point, as Jim knows, I was besides lead for the new technology committee. Still, I'm on that committee, and not as active as I sometimes have time for, but I was on the emergency management committee as well. And I think that I'd absolutely be interested in dialoguing, discussing about where that would go and how we can help in that regard. So thank you again.
All right. Well, thank you for
Awesome.
coming on the show. Jim, do you have anything else you wanted to add real quick before I stop?
Oh, I mean, like you said, there's a lot more that we could talk about, and maybe the next podcast that we do with Joe, we can just focus in on one area, and you and I can discuss that a little bit more. But this podcast, we want to just give a broad overview, say, hey, this is out there. This is something that Cal Warren has used, and water utilities throughout California have been using. And so we really want to just give them an overview of here's the big toolkit that you have. Which tools you use, well, that's up to you. But I think we can dig a little bit deeper, and maybe as this gets out, we might get some questions from the podcast listeners and the YouTube viewers to say, hey, I'd like to focus on this area, and let's dig in deeper.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
So thanks a lot.